Gentlemen, how were the wines this morning?
Mixed bags.
Some superb ones, and thankfully, and then some ones that made us pay our dues.
Cabernet Franc being one of the highlights. I hope you agree. Peter and I being on the same panel today.
We had you had the superior category of Cab Franc. We had some interesting lesser priced Cabernet Franc, and they shone through to a certain degree. But yeah, I mean Pinot Gris certainly showed well for us as well. So it's good to see that. Some good diversity for sure.
Absolutely.
And when you're tasting, are you tasting a whole range of wines from sort of high price to low, or?
Yes, I mean, we had the grueling task of, for example, tasting through oak Chardonnays below $20.
That was hard work.
You're not used to that in your.
I rephrase, perhaps challenging flight. With we found a couple of them, good to very good ones, but. So also we had a very interesting rosé, interesting for the sake of a better term.
Yeah, again, following two difficult vintages. Rosé is usually a response to difficult vintages,
right.
And they were, again, reflected those choices.
Jamie, how did things go today?
Well, it was a game of two halves, I have to say. It was quite challenging to put together logistically, although at the end of the day I believe we achieved what we had set out to achieve. There were some interesting wines, some very, very good wines, some absolute dogs, but you find those all over the world. And it's nice to actually taste all of them together, do a comparative tasting, and then you can actually sort of set the quality bar. Very good fun.
And how are your judges? Did they behave themselves?
All of them behaved themselves, actually. Evan Saviolidis sent back more wines than the rest of the room put together. But that's the way he is. He's a very, very, very focused wine judge, and his group they definitely benefited from having him as their team leader, shall we say.
How many wines have you tasted this morning?
Today we tasted about 60 wines.
And what were your impressions?
My impression, and I think I speak for our table, so ably led by Evan Saviolidis, was that perhaps the best wines had not been entered in the competition.
I see, okay. So any surprises, anything really unusual?
What was surprising was how undistinguished many of the wines were.
Oh dear, okay, so so you were underwhelmed.
We were disappointed in the quality of the entries. We do not lose our faith in the quality of our industry. We simply think that some of the best wines were not entered and some of the lesser wines were.
Okay, I see. So your advice to winemakers and producers for next year is only enter the
Our
best.
advice is that be sure that you're entering well-made wine with the proper levels of ripeness and proper technique, and we will appreciate them and judge them enthusiastically, correctly, and highly.
Petra, you were judging wine this morning. What's the difference between judging wine and judging cheese?
Well, I guess the first difference is spitting out wine into a cup is a little different than spitting out half-chewed cheese. Yeah, that is a little bit. Yeah, and other than that, I you certainly look for different characteristics and so on. I think tasting or judging cheese or going through that process is a little higher in calories than judging wines might be, but both very pleasant experiences, and you get a chance to try different wines and side by side and really sort of pick out different nuances and so on. And the same goes for cheese. So there's some similarities, but some differences that way.
Were there any surprises, or was there anything that really stood out
as a wine, or am I allowed to say? Sure. There's always some wines that stand out from the rest, and I don't think I can tell you which one. We don't actually know which ones, but yeah, there were certainly wines that stood out from the rest of the pack.
So just to be clear, everything was blind, so you were...
Everything was blind, that's right. We have no idea
Did you
which
taste
wine
any,
is which.
Did you taste anything and say, aha, I know what this is? Or
No, I can't say that that's true. I think on the cheese side, I probably have a better familiarity with the cheeses that are out there. So in some cases, I can pick out. I know exactly who made that cheese. With the wine side, because I'm not in the wine space quite as much, I couldn't do that. But I suspect those who are professional sommeliers maybe can taste it and say, oh, I know exactly whose wine that is. So, but I wasn't quite at that level.
Tasting is, you have to be pretty disciplined about it. You have to really stay focused and have a system in your head if it's not the one that's on paper. For getting at the outstanding wines in a flight, and I think our table did a good job of that today. We took our time. We weren't the first in the room to finish. We took our time, and I think we evaluated the wines really fairly.
And was there a consensus at your table, or?
Pretty much. We were down to there was some on certain wines. The scores were polar opposites, but it happened rarely. Most of the time, the table came to a consensus. If, say, a flight were 10 wines, then we'd narrow it down. We'd narrow it down to 3 or 4 that were in contention.
Any surprises today, or outstanding?
Well, going around and looking at the labels, the first thing you try to do is remember how you ranked the wines in your flight. And when you're tasting them blind, it's a completely level playing field. You don't have any sort of preconceived notion of the quality or the provenance of the wine, who the winemaker was. None of that stuff. It's all off the table, which is great, because then you can really fairly judge the wines, and also really kind of fairly judge your own palate. You may think that you like wines of a certain style, and then you discover through the blind tasting process that perhaps your tastes have shifted.
What's it like to be a winemaker judging your peers?
Humbling, always. You never know how it's going to turn out until you come and see what's on the table after the show. But I think we've come a long way, Niagara, and it's good to see that we're moving in the right direction. So some fabulous wines, actually.
Were there some things that really stood out in your in what you were tasting?
Yeah, some Cab Francs that are aging really well. I think 2007 was a big vintage, but I think some of the 07s are really starting to soften and show their true colours. Quite impressive. And always Chardonnay and Riesling, always very favourable. The White Knights of Niagara, for sure.
When you're tasting blind, do you ever come across a glass and say, aha, I know who that is? Or?
I tend not to say too much early on, but as the tasting goes by and people loosen up a bit, I have seen a couple that I kind of shout out, and there was a couple today actually.
Were there any absolute surprises or shocks?
Yeah, there was a wine, I guess I'm not allowed to say right now, but there's a few wines that were very surprising, and not wines that I thought would show as well as they did, which tells me that a lot of people are picking up their socks and lifting their game quite a bit.
Interesting. And what in what categories? Or?
Cabernet Franc, actually, a variety I'm not that used to making, but I saw some fantastic Cab Francs today. So good stuff.
How were the wines this year, Anton?
The wines, I think, compared to last year, the quality overall was better. So I was very happy to see that. It's still very challenging. Wine tasting, judging competitions are very, very challenging. You need to sort of stay focused, make sure you're spitting.
And how many hours were you sitting at a table tasting wine?
What time is it now? I suppose it's
2 o'clock.
It's about 2 o'clock. I imagine it was about 4.5 hours or so. So it does take
Does your palate get tired?
Yeah, your palate gets very fatigued. Much like my patience when dealing with Peter Boyd for 4.5 hours sitting at the next table.
So you have to work. I mean,
it's hard work. Like you by the end, especially in the last flight, which is usually the sweet wines, it's verging on exhausting. Number one, your teeth are sensitive. Your enamel's been stripped down. And at one point I was actually tasting wine out of the right side of my mouth because the left side was just a little bit too sensitive because of all the acidity. When you throw in the sugar at the end, it's actually quite exhausting. But a very good experience though. It's really educational. Forces you to to look at wines different light and to break them down differently than you would when you're consuming them for pleasure.
Any surprises?
Yeah, actually, we encountered a number of faulty wines today, and asked for replacement wines, and it's a very good thing we did, or else a few of the wines would have been condemned.
Condemned. Were any wines condemned anyway?
Yes, there were a few. We still haven't sort of connected those dots yet. We have all the wines and their corresponding position in the judging, but I haven't gone through and actually figured out which ones were which. All of them, but there were the mixed white category was quite challenging. I mean, they were the blended whites.
Right.
Really all over the map. Very hard to sort of stay focused. You really needed to judge each wine separately. Not to mention the blended reds as well. They were. It was a challenging category because it's hard not to compare the wines with one another and to put them in the context of that actual flight. And it's really important to prevent yourself from doing that.
Was there any varietal or style that was stronger than the others?
To be honest, I was quite surprised with across the board the blended reds, and this did not include classic Bordeaux blend. So it was blended reds outside of that Bordeaux blend category. They were actually probably the most consistent of all the wines. Maybe not the highest scoring, but across the board it was the most consistent flight for me. There was very little variance from one wine to the next in terms of quality, I found. That was very surprising.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.